So right now we're going to check out some locations that we've already looked at in previous Memories of the San Fernando Valley videos, but I wanted to dive a little bit deeper and get a little bit more info about these locations. So here right now to help me do that is Evan. You might also know him as LA in a Minute. What's up, Evan? How are you doing?
What is up? I am doing great.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me, man. It's gonna be a good time.
Absolutely. So if you guys don't know about LA in a Minute, he has got an amazing Instagram channel along with Twitter, TikTok, and now YouTube. And basically he is making short videos packed with information about LA. He does videos about LA history, LA locations, just a lot of information about Los Angeles, right?
That is absolutely right.
So if you are not following LA in a Minute, as soon as you're done watching this video, you need to head over to all of his social medias and follow him. I will put all the information to all of his different social medias in the description. But right now, we have got a lot of information to go over, so let's get into it.
Let's go see what we can find. Okay, we're here at Sherman Oaks Castle, which actually has over 200,000 customers per year. And get this, it's owned by the city of Los Angeles. This is the only facility of its kind that the city runs on a for-profit recreational basis. And the story behind that's kind of interesting. Now, this land is owned by the Army Corps of Engineers. The Sepulveda Dam is about a mile, maybe even less away. And in 1938, the Army Corps of Engineers had to buy this land to build the Sepulveda Dam, to create the Sepulveda Basin, which in itself is its own story. But this piece of land was unused until the 1970s when the city decided to lease it out to private companies. Now, that first company that came in was an expanding recreational based company that was responsible for Malibu Castles, which was a chain of, mini golf, arcade games. Pinball was big at the time. There were flight simulators inside, and they had different locations throughout the country. This was actually their fourth location. They opened it in Sherman Oaks. So they opened this up. It became a recreational facility on city land, but run by a private vendor. Now, for the 70s through the 80s, it was wildly popular. It kept expanding. They keep it in great shape. But in the late 1980s, early 90s, they started to have a little bit of a problem. Malibu Castle turned into Malibu Grand Prix. Whether or not it was an ownership issue, the place started degrading a little bit and it became less family friendly. By the beginning of the 1990s, the complaints were such that the city actually decided to take it back over, and they essentially kicked Malibu Grand Prix out of the space, kept the facility more or less the same, but started running it in a more family-friendly manner. At that point, they had three different vendors. It was the mini golf, it was the batting cage, and it was the food vendor. So there's three different vendors, all contracted out by the city. And then lo and behold, in the 90s, there was a renaissance, and this became a go-to spot, whether it's for kids, whether it was for dates, or whether it was for seniors. Little known fact, they used to have senior golf tournaments in the 1990s here. 18 holes of mini golf for seniors, which was a popular way to get people in the door, and then just a true family environment. Also, a little known fact, from 1979 to 1988, Malibu Castle, or Malibu Grand Prix at the time, hosted the San Fernando Valley Miniature Golf Invitational. So that ran for 10 years, obviously didn't have much fanfare, and with mini golf sort of dying off in the public ethos at the time, that kind of frittered away. But we're here at the Sherman Oaks Castle, and it's time to go inside.
So we tried to head out to the mini golf course, but we were stopped by management. She said we weren't allowed to film here on the property, and that we actually couldn't even go out onto the course unless we were going to play.
Tisk.
But that's okay. We found this cool shot with the gingerbread house back there, and you got a few more facts for us.
So check this out. Why mini golf? Well, it turns out in the 20s, 30s, all the way through about the 1960s, mini golf was one of the most popular recreational sports in the United States, and of course, Los Angeles. And there were hundreds of mini golf courses in the Southland. So when the city, the city leased out the land and they knew the prospective vendor was going to be a mini golf course, they were like, hey, let's do it. Now, Side note is that during the 60s, counterculture took hold. In the 70s, the remnants still remained. So mini golf wasn't exactly a top-notch recreational activity for those people. So the mini golf craze kind of died out. But with this wonderful facility in the perfect location in the burgeoning San Fernando Valley, mini golf ended up winning out. Now, how profitable? How much money is this? Why did the city want to take this over? Well, in the early 1990s, the annual profit on this property was about $100,000. And when you think about that for 12 months, it's not really a lot for a private business. Now, the city took it over, as I mentioned, made it more family friendly. And at that point, they instilled, they cleaned everything up, new management. And by the end of the decade, actually by 2009, this turned a $3 million annual profit, one of the most lucrative profit centers for the city of Los Angeles. So I always question, why don't they open more? Now, this is kind of one of a kind. It is one of a kind in the sense of the city, but I think that that's a reason that those of us here in the San Fernando Valley should really cherish this place. And by the way, one more fact, there are 28 employees here, all of whom are technically employed by the city of Los Angeles. So now we're at the Sherman Oaks Galleria, which is an open-air, mixed-use, residential business combo with some shopping, gym, movie theaters. But the history behind the Sherman Oaks Galleria is kind of insane. In fact, at one point, this was not just the epicenter of the San Fernando Valley, but this was ground zero for Valley Girl culture, for the Valley stereotype. You see, what happened is this used to be all agricultural land. In fact, this land was owned by Moses Sherman of Sherman Oaks, and then it went unused, wasn't developed. Late 60s happened, San Fernando Valley starts turning into more than just a bedroom community, and these four corners right here, the gateway into the city, Sepulveda and Ventura, weren't really developed. First, in 1969, a skyscraper goes up across the street. It was the Union Bank building, and then somebody had the idea, after 10 years of success, they're like, you know what? Maybe we should build a mall right here. So lo and behold, in 1980, the Sherman Oaks Galleria rises from nothing. 3 stories, enclosed, all the latest technology, design, infrastructure, and immediately it was a magnet for the Valley youth. And not just that, it incubated that culture, that Valley Girl culture, where kids would get dropped off, do mall crawls, hang out at the food court, look at the cute girls, the cute boys. And that's where the stereotypes started developing. And then you had the movies, Valley Girl, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which just cemented all of those stereotypes. Frank Zappa came out with the song Valley Girl, and he mentions the mall by name in that song. That's how influential it was. And some of the stereotypes might not have been the most positive, but they were true. And that is what the San Fernando Valley, the fabric of that youth culture, for those of us that grew up in the 80s, it all came out of right here. I remember, in fact, for me, I had a spelling bee inside the Sherman Oaks Galleria, and I remember being nervous because I came from a whole different part of the valley, and I'm like, whoa, Sherman Oaks Galleria, like that's where the cool kids hang out. And that's kind of what the valley really was, is everybody looked at this, and it wasn't just the valley, it was in the city. It was worldwide by this point that people knew the Sherman Oaks Galleria. But all good things come to an end, and the beginning of the end started to happen in the early 1990s. The 2 anchors of the Sherman Oaks Galleria were Robinson's and May Company. And now Robinson's and May Companies, you remember, they merged. So what ended up happening is both of them turned into Robinson's May. Now that's a little weird. That sort of took some of the luster off. But what also happened is you have the Sherman Oaks Fashion Square, the Westfield, Topanga, all these other malls started bumping up and giving competition to the Sherman Oaks Galleria. And then 1994, the earthquake happens. Now, Sherman Oaks Galleria was spared. They actually opened 11 days later for foot traffic, but Robinson's May didn't fully open for another 4 years. And during those 4 years, the traffic of the mall dwindled until it started petering out to the point that almost 90% of the businesses no longer existed. During that point is when Douglas Emmett stepped in, 1997, Douglas Emmett bought this property for $51 million, which in retrospect is a bargain basement price. But at the time, people thought they were nuts. What are you gonna pay for a mall that's dwindling, going down by the wayside? People thought mall culture was over. That whole milieu, that whole ethos had disappeared. So what did Douglas Emmett do? Well, first, there was a suit and a countersuit between Douglas Emmett and Robinson May. Robinson's blamed Douglas Emmett for the lack of traffic. Douglas Emmett said Robinson May not opening was responsible for the lack of traffic. They settled out of court in 1999. The reason why that's significant is because that's when Douglas Emmett sprung into action. They invested $200 million, making this a $251 million infrastructure project. And what did they do? Did they make it another mall? Kind of. They took all of the Sherman Oaks Galleria-ness, the enclosed, the 3 stories, it's a mall, threw that by the wayside, made it an open air, mixed use, million square foot offices, restaurants, a little bit more upscale businesses. And to this day, that's how the Sherman Oaks Galleria thrives in its new iteration.
So yeah, even though everything is different, this right out here, this whole courtyard, this was like the main center of the original mall. This is all those movies that we were talking about, Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Commando, we gotta mention.
That was all right here. Arnold swinging across the, swinging from onto the elevator. That was right here. This was like the main center of the mall. And I gotta say, I definitely miss it.
I mean, here we are on a Friday, and I gotta say this, I actually worked at a building catty corner here for 15 years, and I've seen sort of the evolution of this Galleria area.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting because this mall has went from like the cultural icon of Los Angeles, specifically the San Fernando Valley, to this sort of antiseptic, you know, they call it mixed use residential, but let's be honest, it has sort of a vacant pass-through kind of feel where you'd be hard-pressed to really even call it a mall at this point. And it is the Sherman Oaks Galleria, but I always say in name only.
Yep, I definitely agree. I miss, even though the Sherman Oaks Galleria is here, I miss the Sherman Oaks Galleria.
Of course.
And you mentioned you remember coming here for a spelling bee. I remember coming here when I was like 13 to go trick-or-treating with my friends in the Galleria. That was the first time I trick-or-treated like away from my parents. I went out with friends and we walked around this mall and we met up with some girls and you know, so, and I also remember coming here right at the end. You mentioned how like all the stores were vacant. I remember walking through the mall with my girlfriend and like looking around and being like, what happened to this mall?
End of that mall culture, man, honestly. It's definitely a different chapter in the Valley. Okay, now we're here at what used to be the Reseda Country Club, which is a place near and dear to my heart. So my dad used to be a boxing manager and a lot of the fights were here. But more importantly, the Reseda Country Club was one of the most significant music venues in all of Los Angeles, and especially the San Fernando Valley. This building used to be a save-on. It was built in the 1950s, but in the 70s it closed down. And club promoter Chuck Landis, who founded the Roxy in West Hollywood, saw an opening in the San Fernando Valley for a music venue. Now, he looked at the data and he saw that the lion's share of music purchases in the San Fernando Valley were for country music. At the time, I guess that speaks to the demographic out here in the Valley, and especially Reseda. He also noticed that the attendance for the country concerts in the other venues in LA, most of the constituents came from the Valley. So what did he do? He wanted to open the Valley's premier country and Western music venue, so he called it the Country Club. Now at first, it was great. It was a nice, intimate, 1,000-seat venue. And the first month, he had Merle Haggard, he had Loretta Lynn, some great country acts. But the Palomino Club in North Hollywood was the premier spot for that type of music. So when they were trying to book the country acts, most of them were like, yo, we're just gonna do the Palomino Club if we're gonna be in the Valley. So what happened? Chuck Landis had to pivot, and he did a double pivot. Number one, he started making it a boxing venue. And at the time, the Valley was a hotbed for boxing. Tex Cobb, Frankie Duarte, Michael Nunn, the Ruelas brothers. So the fight scene was hot and people would come and they'd fill the country club. But again, it was still a music venue. And two promoters took over and started booking some of the biggest rock acts in the world. B.B. King, Tina Turner, Bad Religion, Social Distortion. By 1987, the country club was so renowned as a music venue that Prince held the MTV Awards after party at the country club. MTV was so smitten by that performance that they hosted their New Year's event that year at the country club. But alas, in 1988, neighborhood complaints over the years of drunken, inebriated customers stumbling out. There were complaints of sex on front yards, urination on front doors. The LA City Council revoked the liquor license. And that was the beginning of the end of the downfall for the Reseda Country Club. Now, in the 90s, there was a sort of a renaissance. Boxing cards were still here. They tried to have some music shows, but it never really rekindled the spirit that it had as the country club. And by 2000, as it is today, it was taken over by a Spanish language church, and that's what it is in 2023.
Now, the next location that we're going to talk about was located directly across the street from the Reseda Country Club, and that was the Sherman Square roller rink.
Okay, so now we're here at this Walgreens, which actually has a storied Valley history in the 1970s and 80s. At one point, it was the Sherman Square roller rink. Now, roller rinks were all the rage in the 70s. There were films, there were roller derbies. It was a popular hobby, and roller rinks were popping up. There was Skateland in Northridge, other places. But this one was special. In the early 70s, it started nondescript. They'd have Boy Scout club meetings here, senior skate nights, arts and craft shows. 1976, that changed. A local fella named Brad Dunton set the marathon roller skating record, and I triple checked this, by roller skating for 201 consecutive hours. Now, of course, there's rest breaks, there were restroom breaks, there were even 20-minute sleep breaks, but 201 hours, Guinness Book of World Records certified right here. There were also attempts at the barrel jumping, who could do the longest roller skating barrel jump, because again, roller skating was a really big thing. But that's not why the Sherman Square roller rink became popular. It was because of a nightclub held by former actress Helena Calianiotes. She was famous, she was a great actress, she worked with a lot of great actors, but she was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for her 73 film, Golden Globe nomination. The film was called Kansas City Bombers, which was, of course, about roller skating. So she started this club Monday nights. It was the most exclusive club in all of Los Angeles. Rolls Royces, paparazzi, celebrities as far as the eye can see. It was called Skateaway. Now it's spelled Skataway, S-K-A-T-A-W-A-Y. But to be on the list, Helena had to like you and had to approve you, and there were only 400 members at any given time. Now this membership list included Jack Nicholson, Cher, the football player Jim Brown, Bianca Jagger, Ringo Starr, and this was the hottest club in town right here. And after that happened, well, it became the hottest place to skate and the best place to be seen. Celebrities and non-celebrities alike. The LA Weekly, in fact, said that this was the place where the youth of Los Angeles wanted to meet people and wanted to be seen. So in the early 80s, the mid 80s, it succeeded and it kept on thriving till an unfortunate incident in 1987. By then, gang members had found out about this place and sort of infiltrated it. There had been a couple of issues here and there with the police. But one night there was a fight outside the roller skate. The fight went out on the streets. There was a car chase that ensued that culminated in a gang shooting on the San Diego freeway. And all fingers pointed at the rising gang problem here. So they tried to crack down, but unfortunately from 87 through 90, the gang problem just became bigger and bigger. They shortened the hours, they closed the doors. At a certain point, you had to fill out a form beforehand to be approved. But alas, in 1990, that was the final time where they were shutting the doors on the Sherman Square roller rink. And now for the next 10 years, the building kind of floundered until in 2000 it was raised, and 2001, this Walgreens was put up. So Sherman Square roller rink was a legendary part of San Fernando Valley and Reseda history. And though it's a memory, if you listen closely enough, you can still hear the chugga 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 of the roller skating wheels.